All right, we want to bring in our panel for a reaction to all of this going on. Joining me now, John Fredericks. He's a syndicated radio talk show host, as well as Seema Iyer. She's an attorney and journalist. Good morning to you both. I'm excited to talk to you throughout the program. We've got a lot to get to. Seema, we'll start with you here. Violence. Of course, we're seeing it spread across America. Looters ransacking stores, businesses totally damaged. How does this violence and unrest take away from the peaceful protests that we are seeing pop up across the nation?
It depends on who you ask. Some people are saying, hey, just listen to the message, ignore the looting, ignore the violence. But the truth is, and this is a very old expression we're all familiar with, if, we can't have nice things, right? We've all heard that. And in this case, it is my opinion that if you cannot separate the peaceful protesters from the violent protesters, nobody should be able to protest. There is way too much risk, not just of property, but of person. People are getting arrested. People are getting hurt. And there's just no way to control this anymore.
Yeah, we're seeing that play out, unfortunately. I mean, just to bring people up to speed, last night in St. Louis, 4 officers were shot. There was a shooting against police officers in Las Vegas, and in Buffalo, New York, an SUV sped towards armed officers right now. So, John, we are dealing with tension between people who are protesting, the police, and then people who are acting violently in these situations.
Emma, this is a tragedy beyond the scope of what you can see on TV. I live in Washington, D.C., and my city is unrecognizable over 3 days. And what we have here is we have complete lawlessness. And I got to tell you something else. There is a dangerous overestimation of Antifa. This is a small group of people. What is happening here is you simply have crime and lawlessness and looters stealing and burning down stores. They're pulling up with trucks, banging windows, taking out everything they can on the backs of these what should have been peaceful protesters. You have to restore law and order on the streets, or what happens is you have no society. And what you got with these Democratic mayors and governors, Emma, is incredible. I've never seen this before, where basically they'll put in an order like a simple thing, go home at 7 o'clock, a curfew, it's their order. And then when their own cops attempt to enforce their own order, they then rescind it or ignore it or apologize for doing what they were told to do. I mean, I've never seen this in my life. In Richmond yesterday, Mayor LeVar Stoney institutes a curfew at 7 p.m. After 7 p.m., nobody's paying attention to his order, his curfew. The cops there disperse the crowd on Monument Avenue with tear gas. He then apologizes for using the tear gas, has a press conference asking for forgiveness, and furloughs the cops that did the tear gas to institute his order. So you're now apologizing for simply enforcing the law. I don't know, Emma, how we go on this way.
Yeah, and John, that's just one example there. I do want to keep this conversation going. John and Seema, please stick around. We've got a lot more to cover when National Report returns. All right, to keep this conversation going, we want to bring back in our panel today, John and Seema. Seema, this is a powerful moment that was caught on tape, thankfully. Again, Nia's talking about how it could be interpreted differently if there wasn't proof of what actually played out.
What an inspiring young woman. She gives us all so much hope in this world. But I'm sorry, Emma, right now it's just too risky because Nia even said, think of what she captured, right? She captured vandals. And think about what's happening now, approximately 11 people dead because of the riots. So unless there is some alternative to guarantee peaceful protest, such as, this is just an idea I had, why don't people try a sit-in? Maybe if everybody just sits on the ground and physically demonstrates a peaceful posture, maybe that would work instead.
Maybe, perhaps. You know, I think I've seen a few instances where people might have done something similar to that in response here to this specific reaction to George Floyd's death. John, your reaction to seeing, again, you know, we talked earlier about the use of Antifa. There's no guarantee that these women might have been a part of that organization. But the fact that there's, you know, such a dispute between people a part of the Black Lives Matter movement who are there to protest peacefully for a reason, and they're telling others to stop destroying property.
Well, their message is lost, and that's on them. Their message, which is peaceful protest for change, when you protest, you want to get change. Those of us that lived through the 60s understand there were protests against the war, against bombing Hanoi. People wanted change. They wanted us to get out of Vietnam. You protest for change. That message, Emma and Seema, is gone now. Nobody's paying any attention to that. All they're doing is wondering is how they're going to protect their city, how they're going to protect their store, how they're going to protect their home, and how they're going to protect their family. And so nobody is thinking about why this actually started because of what happened in Minneapolis with that terrible incident with George Floyd. And that's really the tragedy of this. But I got to tell you both, I heard the president's speech yesterday. I liked it. I thought it was a day late, but good. But Seema, you nailed it. I mean, this is not a time for tweets, and this is not a time for talk. I mean, his tweet he just sent out, and there's no bigger supporter of President Trump than I am. But the tweet he just sent out about Mayor Cuomo, I got to tell you, who cares whether he sends in the National Guard or not? You just went on TV, and you said you either get control of your city or I'm going to send in the military. Seema Iyer just outlined for you the authority that he has to do that.
Yeah, guys, I got to cut in. We're out of time right now for this segment. Great points being made. Great conversation. Please stick around. We've got a lot more to get to.
Thank you.
Protesting in Detroit ended on an uplifting note for the crowd's young leaders yesterday. One Detroit teen, 16-year-old Stephen Perez, helped organizers peacefully disperse a crowd of hundreds after the curfew to receive a surprising phone call minutes later from Mayor Mike Duggan, who was watching the live stream of the event and praised him for his leadership. Duggan said, quote, "You are everything that's special about the city of Detroit. We're going to fight this injustice because of people like you." Young people, in fact, across the nation stepping up during these protests, many fighting for peace. Talk about this, we bring back our panel, John Fredericks, Seema Iyer. Also welcoming digital reporter for Campus Reform, Eduardo Naret. There he is. Eduardo, good to see you, buddy. After watching these protests unfold after the past couple of days, Eduardo, it's evident that the majority of protesters are young people in these crowds. Why do you think that is, Eduardo?
Well, what stands out to me is what Americans have been seeing on TV these last few days really started in the classroom. So for the last few years at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we haven't only reported on how these campus protests have grown more radical and extreme with groups like Antifa leading the way, but we've also shown how these groups have received endorsements from university professors. So just as an example, over the last few days, a Georgetown University professor called on the rioters in downtown Washington, D.C. to destroy the Trump International Hotel. A professor at Northwestern University said that what's been going on is an appropriate response. And so we see young people on campus getting involved with these groups, and then when they hear their university professors endorse the actions of these groups, that gives them the green light to participate, that gives them the green light to go out there, which unfortunately often leads to maybe some more radical and extreme elements.
Eduardo, really quick, and then I'll get to the panel here, but I want to ask you about Campus Reform. You guys do some good work out there. I know you guys see campus protests. There's a lot of activists there in schools. There's reform calls for. How do you compare that to what's happening with the George Floyd protests? And keep in mind, there are two parts of this whole thing, the peaceful protests and then the violence we see.
Well, I think you see the same thing on college campuses. We know a lot of college students are politically active, and it's good to see when students demonstrate and use their First Amendment right to go out and protest peacefully, but unfortunately, we also see the flip side of that. I've been on college campuses myself where I've seen Antifa tables set up, recruiting tables in the middle of campus, set up to recruit and talk to these young students who don't really know what the movement is about to get them to join the movement. And so that's where the issue is. You know, we want people to protest about what they care about, to use their First Amendment right, but on a college campus, we're seeing what we've now seeing in the rest of the country. We see groups that are peaceful, but we also see the more radical and extreme elements.
Wait a minute. So you've seen a table set up. Does this table that you're talking about, it doesn't say Antifa on it, right? I mean, how do you know it's an Antifa organization?
No, they do, and that's what's so difficult about it is the group was called Anti-Fascist of Gainesville, Florida. I was a student several years ago, and I saw it for my own eyes. And when you go up to the table, the recruiters are smart. They don't talk about protesting, rioting, looting. They talk to the students about standing up against racism, standing up against fascism, which we know Antifa's not really about. But that's how they're able to reel these students in. They attract these students who say, hey, well, I'm against those things. The students go to those tables, they get involved with these groups, only to later find out and see how extreme they really are. So these groups are on campus. They're doing it in plain sight, and they're doing it with the Antifa name. They're not hiding it.
Seema, I believe that's called recruiting.
Exactly. It makes me think of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Taliban and susceptibility. When Eduardo was giving that example about the Georgetown professor who would, say something radical and then almost incite younger people, there is a danger as well as a promise to having young people lead the way.
John, your thoughts on that?
Well, Sean, look, they've been stuck at home for 3 months with nothing to do, and they lost their jobs, and they're not in college or high school. So what are they doing? So now they're out protesting, trying to have something to do. They lost their jobs because of this ridiculous lockdown. I got to tell you, Sean, if there's anything that this violence has done and these protests and mobs and looting, it has showed us the complete ludicrous point of these lockdowns, because nobody's social distancing, no masks, and there's no body bags in the street, people dying from COVID. So, we can go back to the college campuses and what the professors are saying, but in reality, you didn't get this when college kids were getting out of school, wanted to get a job, wanted to get ahead in the greatest economy in the history of the republic and get a piece of the action and a piece of the pie, open their own business one day. Now they're stuck at home with nothing to do. So, look, chance to riot. That's what's going on here, and it's sad and it's sick. We need to get back to work.
Oh, I'm out of time, but John, I could have just one-on-one with you about the whole lockdown situation. I appreciate that. John Seema, stick around. Eduardo Durrett, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome back to National Report. Judge Emmett Sullivan's lawyers issuing a rare response on his behalf yesterday, explaining that the judge hadn't dismissed the case against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn because the, quote, unusual developments provided a reason to question the DOJ's motives. This comes after both federal prosecutors and Flynn's lawyers requested the case be dropped after exculpatory evidence surfaced. Minutes later, the DOJ submitting its own filing, requesting the case be dismissed, suggesting that FBI agents may have manipulated a key document and that questioning the integrity of the DOJ in an effort to keep the prosecution alive is wrong. A lot of developments here. To weigh in on this, we welcome back our panel today, John Fredericks and Seema Iyer, as well as the former advisor to President Trump, Sam Nunberg. Guys, I know we're kind of being distracted a little bit at this point by coronavirus and the protests breaking out nationwide, but this is another story that we want to keep our eye on. Sam, what's your take to these recent developments in the case?
This is one of the most outrageous acts of judicial activism we have ever seen in modern history. This is not theoretical. What you're seeing is a kangaroo court. Remember, Michael Flynn pled guilty to something that is not even listed in his 302, his conversation. It was re-edited by Peter Strzok, who initially had a fight with Lisa Page after his initial interview in the White House. And what we see now is that once that information was looked at and Attorney General Barr appointed an independent prosecutor to look at this information, they were aghast, they were disgusted, and they said they want to drop the case. I have never seen a judge in his infinite wisdom, and this is a Clinton appointee radical leftist judge, decide that he needs to appoint an independent arbiter to decide whether or not he should simply follow a federal rule of criminal procedure. That's it, a simple rule that if the government wants to drop its case for whatever reason that may be, he has to follow it. And I would also remind everyone that this judge also had a bunch of MSNBC analysts who worked on Watergate issue an amicus brief. I mean, this was a smorgasbord potluck of a bunch of people wanting to relive and relitigate the good old Nixon days.
Well, it seems like Judge Sullivan is doing everything in his power to keep this case open and going and refusing to drop these charges. Right, John?
Well, it seems like we have plenty of resources to try to frame and lock up a 30-year military veteran and former general of the United States. We seem to have plenty of resources to lock up a gym owner trying to put food on the table, but we can't keep our streets safe from people breaking windows and destroying our businesses and setting them on fire. I mean, the ridiculousness of the abuse of justice of Michael Flynn. I tell you what, this has got to put chills up everybody's spine because, quite frankly, Emma, this could happen to anybody. I mean, the federal government has unlimited resources to do to you whatever they want. And I thought we fought wars for this, Sam. This is unbelievable.
Yeah. And Sam, tomorrow, former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein will finally be questioned about his actions by the Senate Judiciary Committee as its first witness into an investigation of the origins of the evolution of the Russia probe. I know it's a lot to keep track of, but what do you expect this testimony to come from this testimony?
Well, one issue that should come up is the Michael Flynn indictment. Rod Rosenstein was a de facto attorney general, and he is the one who approved this indictment because anything Mueller wanted to do had to get the rubber stamp for Rod Rosenstein. He has a lot to explain for himself. Rod Rosenstein and his appointment is one of the main reasons that President Trump was under a cloud of investigation, was someone who could not act as president evenly, who really, and this really hurt the interests of the American people. We've never seen something like this. But Rosenstein should be questioned on numerous issues. Another issue of the many I wanted to say very quickly is Rod Rosenstein met with Bob Mueller 4 days before Bob Mueller met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, interviewing for the FBI position, and then he appointed Bob Mueller as the head of the Office of Special Counsel. Two issues with that. Obviously, one, how could you do that? How could you have him do that if he already met with the ultimate subject, which was Donald Trump? And number two, Rod, if you're such a smart guy, you couldn't see that Bob Mueller had a mental faculty issue. Anybody else could have seen it. How do you appoint somebody like that to run a $60 million investigation?
Yeah, fair questions. Guys, I'm sorry we ran out of time. Sorry, Seema. But I appreciate everyone coming on the show. Sam Nunberg, John Fredericks, Seema Iyer, thank you so much for joining us today. Great discussion. Take care, everyone.